All right, so welcome to, let me bring it full screen. Welcome to my presentation on this training on developing communication skills in the workplace. So today we're going to talk about different communication skills that can strengthen and possibly inhibit communication among coworkers. So this is really necessary in the classroom, especially this classroom, a one-to-one preschool where, if there's 9 children in the classroom, there's 9 adults. So there is a lot of interaction going on. Have you ever been in a professional setting where there has been an interaction with a coworker and you just thought to yourself, why are they so angry? Why do they seem irritated? You don't know if they're irritated. You don't know for sure, but it's what their communication has conveyed. That's the message they've sent. Do you think you have ever given the feeling to a coworker when you've had a bad day? Maybe you said something and you didn't intend for it to sound rude, but to the person receiving the message, it seemed pretty rude. In education, we become so familiar and comfortable with each other that we sometimes forget that we are in a professional setting and our actions have a great effect on the education of the students that we're teaching. So the purpose of today's training is to increase our own self-awareness of your communication competence and to develop your skills. So the concepts of interpersonal communication are that they are transactional. Information is constantly being sent and received at the same time, with the channels being both verbal and nonverbal. Think of this example. Teacher A states, "I might as well go home since everyone is telling my student what to do," to Teacher B, who just told a student to use a calm voice in the classroom. Teacher B scrunches up their eyebrows and looks uncomfortable. 2 messages are being sent at the same time. The Teacher A is stating what they're feeling, but perhaps through their nonverbal language, it's giving a weird message to the other person. And so Teacher B is showing that they're kind of uncomfortable with the statement, which is being shown nonverbally through scrunching up their eyebrows and looking uncomfortable. Interpersonal communication is sent through multiple channels, as we've just noted. It can be visual or vocal auditory, with the channels being the medium through which messages are being sent. It's also important to know that people create the meanings of messages. Words mean nothing until they're interpreted with subtle exchanges in context of the interaction. If somebody says, "Sorry for interrupting you," on the 5th time they've interrupted you, that sorry really kind of doesn't mean what its meaning is intended. And interpersonal communication is affected by environment and noise. It could be physical. It could be sounds in the background. Imagine if my dogs were barking right now, that'd be a little bit distracting. Physiological, which is conditions internal to the communicator. So they could be hungry. They could have a stomach ache. And then there's psychological. It's the biases and preconceived ideas that they bring to the table. Perhaps they don't like the person they're talking to. Perhaps they don't like the topic of the conversation. Those all play a factor. The principles of interpersonal communication include that they're unavoidable. We work in an education setting, and to think that you can just not talk to anyone throughout the day just can't happen. It's irreversible. Once you say something, you can't take it back. The feelings have been conveyed, the message has been sent, you've left an impression on somebody. Interpersonal communication has content and relational dimensions. There is what is actually being said, and there is how the individuals involved feel about each other. And they both affect the message that's being sent. And effectiveness is learned. Your skills for communicating can be learned, and they can be constantly improved, which is why we are here today. So how to develop competence? Be aware of your perspective. Your perspective is the lens through which you interpret information based on past experiences, attitudes, values and beliefs, personal qualities, professional preparation, and expectations of others. There's your perception, your understanding of what occurred, And it can be influenced by your professional preparation and culture. All cultures perceive things differently. What might be acceptable in America might not be acceptable in a different country, and it's important to be aware of that. And remember that in an interaction, what you think happened or what you perceive has happened, the message that has been sent, you don't know that the other person feels the same way. They may perceive it differently. So how do you become an effective communicator? First, you need to develop a skills repertoire. You need to have a toolbox of skills that you can use because each situation requires different communication skills. The way you communicate with a young child in your class will not be the way that you communicate with a parent, likewise with your supervisor or another administrator or coworker. So choose and adapt your behaviors. Know which skills to use in different situations. Communicate ethically with others. Listen to what they are saying and know that you don't always have to do the talking. Make sure that you accurately send your message. You can check for understanding and watch yourself. Be self-aware of how your interactions affect others. Observe their nonverbal language. Ask them how your interactions make them feel. Check for understanding. Nonverbal communication. This is a big one. It tells a lot. You can say a message, but your nonverbal communication will say a lot more than what the message says. Nonverbal messages are the central mechanism for communicating emotion and attitudes. So there are different types of nonverbal communication. It could be your body language. It could be your facial expression, your posture and orientation, your gestures. So imagine if somebody says, you walk in somewhere and somebody's standing there saying, yeah, I'm happy to be here today. It's going to be a lot different than somebody who says, hey, I'm happy to be here today. So that goes along to my next point, vocal cues. Your voice tone, your pitch, volume, speech rhythm, pacing or tempo, and use and timing of silence all affect how your message is conveyed. And then there's spatial relations, your physical distance between communicators. That's something you need to be aware of. When you talk to a child, being down at their level and being close is appropriate. But imagine if you're speaking to an adult, you don't want to be that close to them. It might be a little uncomfortable. So be aware and look at their other nonverbal cues, their body language, to see how your spatial relations are affecting them. Now we're going to move to effective listening. There are several factors that interfere with effective listening, one being faulty assumptions, which is assuming that you already know what the speaker is talking about, therefore communicating a lack of concern for the other or investment in the interaction. Just because somebody, a lot about flowers and somebody comes up to you and says, hey, this is what I learned about flowers this weekend. Don't assume that you already know what they're going to say. Insufficient time can affect effective listening. If a parent tries to approach you at the end of the day and you've got a meeting in 5 minutes, you're probably not going to listen as well as if you had a time set aside to talk to that parent. And be aware of that. Daydreaming, rehearsing a response. Think about how many times when somebody's been talking to you and maybe you're uncomfortable with the situation and instead of listening to what they're saying, you're thinking about what you're going to say to them. Filtering messages, hearing only what you want to hear and tuning out the rest. Distractions, either environmental or internal, and lack of training in how to effectively listen. So how can you improve your listening skills? First, establish listening goals. What is the conversation about? What should you be listening for? If you start to stray, lose focus, remind yourself of this goal. Eliminate distractions. If you're about to enter an IEP meeting, make sure you've eaten. You don't want to lose focus from the goals of the meeting because you're hungry. If you need to speak to a parent at pickup time and it's loud and crazy in the classroom, move to a quiet area. Turn off your cell phone ringer. Talk less. Don't turn the conversation onto yourself if it is about the other person. Think about how many times you've started a story with somebody and they've maybe related to that story, but go on to tell their own story, which takes away from what you were saying. Avoid prejudgments. Listen for understanding and don't assume you know what the person is saying. Avoid interruptions. Wait until the message seems complete before responding. Focus on the content of the spoken message. Identify key words and themes. And at the same time, focus on the context. How is the message being said? Notice the communicator's body language. So in my earlier example of, happy to be here today, observe if their tone, I'm happy to be here today. Observe how that differentiates the message. So then after you've listened, you need to respond. And there are 4 types of responses that you can do. There is prompting, where you invite the person you are interacting with to share more information. It can be through spoken words, phrases, the use of silence, or the use of nonverbal cues. Prompting is used to encourage the communicator to continue or to show that you're listening and understanding. You can also paraphrase by restating in your own words what you think the other person has said, which demonstrates attention to the topic and understanding what it is said. You can reflect, which describes what the other person is saying and capture the meaning by stating observations of verbal and nonverbal messages. There's questioning, which is gathering information to refine understanding. It is the most common responding behavior, but should be used with caution and avoid overuse. So in giving feedback, it's important to be specific and direct it towards something that is changeable, a behavior that is changeable. What is the point of giving feedback on something that can't be changed? Use descriptive language. Avoid the use of evaluative or advisory feedback. It can be seen as threatening and judgmental. Check for understanding, that the participant knows understood what you were saying. And keep your feedback concise. Too much information can take away from the central message. Only give feedback when requested. It is more likely to be used when asked for rather than imposed on a person. Give the feedback directly to the individual and avoid a third party. Think of the game of telephone. The message gets misconstrued between person to person, and to give effective feedback, just give it directly to the person. As always, be culturally sensitive and keep the feedback well-timed. It's most beneficial when it's given immediately. So to wrap this up, think about interactions you have had with coworkers that have not gone well. Be aware of what part you played in that and ask yourself, what did I do? Maybe I contributed to having this unproductive conversation. What did the other person do that conveyed feelings of unwelcome or discomfort? Be self-aware and practice. Thank you.